in the middle of this interview with Yo-Yo Ma, he said, he about blew my hat off. He said, I hear you're a composer. He said, if you write something for cello, I'll play it. It took me 8 years to write this thing. It was off and on. It wasn't like I had it all the time. Right. And finally, I got it finished and orchestrated the way I wanted and sent it to him. And 2 months went by and I didn't hear anything. And I thought Yo-Yo was trying to figure a tactful way to tell me he doesn't want to ruin his career by playing my composition. When I hear music now and know that I'm hearing it in a way that I could not really hear it or understand it when I was in my 80s or 70s or 60s, and being past 90, the view from 90 can be very different, and some horizons can actually expand.
A conversation with veteran broadcaster Hugh Downs about music and how he taught himself to write classical scores. Coming up next on Music Makers.
Music Makers is made possible in part by NAM, the National Association of Music Merchants. We envision a world in which the joy and many benefits of making music are a precious element of daily living for everyone. Want to play?
Hugh Downs is a true Renaissance man. A familiar presence in broadcasting for 7 decades, he's also a diver, pilot, astronomer, gerontologist, author, science enthusiast, and surprisingly, a self-taught composer of classical music. I sat down to talk with Hugh Downs at the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix, where he told me how it all began when he had some downtime at NBC in the 40s. From what I have researched a little bit, you found some free time on your hands, and there were a lot of pianos around there.
That is true, yeah. That was an easy access. I didn't have a piano in my home at the time. I did when I lived at home and everything, but I didn't have access to a piano. I was very rusty. I never mastered the instrument, really, but I like to play for my own amazement.
Sure.
And so I had time to do that and time to go back to doing some creative stuff, which I started when I was 15. And I was interested in writing music as well, and I got the arrogant idea, and which is true, really. If you write something, no critic can say you're wrong. They can say they don't like it. They can say they can predict the public won't like it. But if you have written something and it sounds like you want it to sound, you cannot be told that you're wrong about it.
So you find yourself with some free time, while you're on the announcing job, and did you have any piano skills at that point? I need to hear about where this music came from.
Yeah, no, I never mastered the instrument, and I wish they'd made me play the piano when I was little and learned where I could sight read and stuff.
Did you take some lessons when you were a little kid or anything?
Yeah, I did. I took lessons on the violin, and no great violinist was the least bit worried. I can tell you that. And then I studied piano, but not for long. I had other things to do, and my parents should have really hammered me to do it, because it would be nice if I had mastered the instrument. But then what I wrote would be more pianistic, and that's not necessarily an advantage.
Right. So I mean, it just takes. I'm still a little bit stunned that you just had in your mind, I'm going to compose some things.
Yeah.
And did you have any what instrumentation? Did you have any idea of how to score things? Or,
yes, I was self-taught in that. Okay. You can read. Well, first of all, you learn the range of instruments.
Right.
And for example, there was in danger. One time when I'd forgotten the range of a piccolo, and I thought, how high can you write for a piccolo?
Yeah, you need
but you look it up, and you look up stuff on orchestration by Rimsky-Korsakov. Also on counterpoint, I read a guy named Ebenezer Prout, and I was probably in my mid-teens, I guess, at the time, who had a curious thing. He wrote about as much as Johann Sebastian Bach did, and had one up on him that Bach had 2 errors in his entire massive production of excellent music. One was a parallel fifth, and the other was crossed voices someplace. So they could point to the fact that Prout had no errors. But his music was so sterile that it just wasn't worth anything, and Bach can tear your heart out with the same rules.
Technically perfect, but no emotion.
Yeah, that was the way Prout was, you know, and then I began to realize what Bach could do within the rules that were set up. Of course, he changed some of them. He tempered the scales, and he did.
But so you're going through this mentally in your teens, and reading about this in your teens?
I started reading that stuff then. And then I began to try to write a little bit, and I wrote a musical setting to the 13th Psalm for the Episcopal Church in time, and that's a kind of a thrill, really, when you write something, you kind of know what it sounds like. But when you hear it, really, and there's something about a pipe organ that can lend dignity to anything you do. And I thought, did I write that? You know, there's that feeling.
Well, I'm still, a bit amazed. I'm taken aback still. So you were composing on a piano, but really just kind of plunking things out.
Yeah.
You self-taught in music notation, and so you were doing some notating.
Oh yeah.
Of the
Well,
things.
I'll tell you where I started learning that. When I was little, and they taught me to play the violin, I there learned the treble clef. You know, because that's what the violin works in.
Every good boy does fine, right?
And when my voice started changing, which was kind of early for me, my voice changed when I was in my early teens, and then the bass clef is what you write for baritone. So I was doing stuff, I was doing some singing then too. Great singers weren't worried either. But I did that. Now that gives me 4-part harmony, right?
Yeah.
A treble and bass clef. And with that, I could start writing stuff. And then learning things about instruments and about orchestration, I could start trying to write for an orchestra. And that's how that started.
So you placed this psalm to music in a setting, and you decided this is going to be an organ piece. Yeah? Yeah,
well, I knew from the beginning that I wanted
You wanted to hear it in church.
I was asked to do that for the church, and it was all right. I don't think it was great. But
So that was really the start of you saying, boy, I actually got something on paper. Somebody actually played it.
That's right. And I'm probably one of the most unprolific composers in history.
Well, the fact that you've done it, seriously, this is a heck of a story that is amazing. And I think it's probably a good story for a lot of viewers to say, this does not take a college training to get to the point where if you want to go out and you've got something in your heart and in your head, get it out.
I think so, and there are things you can't sell. You can't really teach yourself to fly an airplane. That's not safe,
Right.
But there are things you can teach yourself, and people don't realize that they can do that. And if you set out to do it, you'll get it just as well as if somebody's telling you.
Well, especially in today's day, the entire world's knowledge is at our fingertips on the internet. You can certainly find the information you needed, but it's really a wonderful story that you started that way, and I know it's going to continue on, and we have some more things that way. So, your television career starts to blossom, and moves on and on. How did music? Was music kind of a sidekick through all this, or just?
Pretty much. I did. I did classical music programs actually, even in radio in Chicago days, and then for PBS for 10 years I did the Live from Lincoln Center, which gave me a wonderful opportunity to meet great musical artists. Some of them were nervous and worried about it, and some of them were cool as could be. I think Andre Watts, the pianist, they'd have to come and drag him away when it was time for him to go on because he was right with it.
Sure.
But there were others who didn't want to do that. But one time, and this is how this came about, I had not met him, but Yo-Yo Ma, who probably has to be recognized as the greatest cellist of our time, and maybe of all time. I met Piatigorsky. And Casals I interviewed twice, so I knew something about the cello, and I knew that Yo-Yo Ma was the greatest. In the middle of this interview with Yo-Yo Ma, he said, he about blew my hat off. He said, "I hear you're a composer." He said, "If you write something for cello, I'll play it." And I thought, whoa. And I didn't know where he heard it because it wasn't something I publicized.
So this was during these Lincoln Center, that show?
During the Live from Lincoln Center.
It was a great series. Right?
So I accepted the challenge, and we corresponded and everything, and about other things in the interim. But it took me 8 years to write this thing. It was off and on. It wasn't like I had it all the time. Right. And finally, I got it finished and orchestrated the way I wanted, and sent it to him, and 2 months went by and I didn't hear anything. And I thought Yo-Yo is trying to figure a tactful way to tell me he doesn't want to ruin his career by playing my composition. But then I got word from him, he loved it just as is, and he was going to premiere it with the St. Louis Symphony.
Now, I have to ask, so not only did you write the piece for cello, but you wrote all of the orchestration behind it.
Yeah, I did. I had some friends that had suggestions for orchestration that was probably an improvement, but I had orchestrated stuff before. I had been
For full orchestra, writing parts.
for full orchestra. You're right.
I mean, this is not a minor task. I mean,
No,
I know
that's where you got to study stuff like several people wrote good books on orchestration, and one of the best was Rimsky-Korsakov, the composer.
I know you're a voracious reader, but that is still an amazing feat that you,
Well,
through reading about things, could sit down and orchestrate a full. It's one thing to have the creative ability, which I think we all have, but it's just letting it out. But the ability to say, here's the melody I want to hear, and here are maybe some of the harmonies behind it.
Yeah.
But then to take that and really do a full orchestration for a symphony.
It's kind of arrogant.
Well enough to be played by St. Louis Symphony by Yo-Yo Ma. That's a heck of a night.
I was really thrilled because he didn't want to make any changes in it, you know. So my wife and I went to St. Louis and at the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, and there again, kind of like with the organ, I knew what the thing sounded like, but I didn't really, you know. And when the orchestra played it, I thought, boy, it sounds better than I kind of expected, because you get a lot of everything: the actual sound of the instruments, the ambiance of the you know, the acoustics of the hall.
Sure.
All of that brings a reality to it that it doesn't have when you're just thinking of what it sounds like. Think what must Beethoven have done in the end when he couldn't hear anything, and he wrote stuff that, and it's sad that he couldn't really hear it played, but he didn't miss anything.
So I'm still sitting in amazement that you would sit down and decide, I'm going to sit and orchestrate an entire symphony and do it. Yo-Yo Ma plays it, and the St. Louis Symphony plays it, and it all comes off well. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts, I guess, on composing. There are a lot of different ways to go about it. You know, starting with the melody and then, fleshing it out, or give us some thoughts on that.
I would imagine most composers sketch out something, what they want to hear. Maybe starting with a melody and then harmonizing stuff with the melody in four-line harmony, and then say, okay, how do we want the instruments to divide this up? But there are, like Richard Strauss, who just, you could take a 32-line thing and just start writing, and he didn't have to think, he thought in orchestration form.
That truly is genius. You think about that, if you've ever, and you have done that before, you just think it is astonishingly difficult to do.
That is amazing.
But I think it's neat that, and again, a great message for viewers of the show and for everyone that there's a case of someone, you were not a trained musician. You didn't go and study in music schools for 20 years and do all that. You read some books, you figured out some things, but at the end of the day, what you really did is let it out. You said, I'm going to compose, I'm going to do something creative. Here's the theme or the melody of it, and you took off and did that. And I just think that's a fabulous, not only that you did it, but I think it really is a great message. I think for so many people, music is such a mystery. It's like, either you are in music and a musician, or you're not. And either I'm going to make music or I'm going to consume music and just listen to it. And boy, I don't know if I buy that.
It's odd how, like analytical thought and an examination of logic and everything, which is uniquely human. Other animals have intelligence and whatnot, but we have that, and we alone have it. Humans alone have real music. I know birds sing, and you got whale songs, and that's beautiful, but it's not music. Music is when you have tonalities that you can recognize one tone as being higher than the other, and so it's quantitative. Unlike
you can recognize pitch.
Yeah, the pitch is understood. And when you got a pitch, you can sense automatically unless you're really tone deaf, you can sense that when you got twice as many in the frequency, you got an octave, And we don't do that with color, because color is qualitative, and we don't stop and think that when we see purple that's twice the frequency that red is.
Okay.
And
interesting.
And so we alone have that, and have managed to make out of the different pitches various scales. There's all kinds of different scales, but we divide it up, and we understand intuitively what we are hearing by the tonality, by the actual level of the pitch, and that is something that no other life form has. I don't know why that is.
Interesting.
It's uniquely human.
Well, I'll tell you, and the other thing that always just makes my brain kind of explode is the thought that by just listening to something, it can create emotions. that's and that's
Yes,
kind of
isn't
and
that
across
true?
across cultures, across anything. You play something, frantic and dark. Even me doing this, here I am trying to describe it to you by looking that way. But everyone is going to experience. No one that hears something light and lilty is going to be afraid of it.
I think you're right to call it a mystery too.
Yeah.
It certainly is a mystery to me that it can convey the kind of emotions that it does, and it in the hands of different composers, like Ebenezer Prout, who wrote as much as Bach, and his music was totally sterile, and yet Bach, as we say, can tear your heart out with all kinds of stuff within that same framework. What does that? That's mysterious to me. Now, I haven't read, maybe somebody's written some books on it and has an explanation, but I haven't run across that.
I doubt that's probably going to be one of those mysteries. I doubt anyone can pin that down one way or the other. So as far as you just listening to music now, you've been I kind of sense that you really are a somewhat serious listener of music now.
Yeah.
What are you listening to? Talk to me about that a little bit.
There are composers I don't get tired of, composers I like to hear but seldom, composers that I go by season. I don't like to play Sibelius's wonderful works in the summertime. There's a kind of a frozen north quality to it that it fits better in the winter, and it would be like playing Jingle Bells on the 4th of July. That's a jarring thing. You got to make things fit. What I like in the composers that I keep coming back to and listening to when I can, first Beethoven, probably the greatest in that respect. Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, the three Bs, obviously, their stuff is well worth hearing often. And in a different school and train of thought, I think starting with probably Carl Maria von Weber, but then going on to Wagner and Bruckner and Mahler, Strauss, and that line is
Sure.
And those things I like hearing frequently.
As you listen to it, do you let the emotion take you away, or are you analytically thinking about how are they doing this, or are you?
No, but something is happening. There's an evolution. It has to be within my mind because I'm listening to the same recording maybe. But I've learned something in my life has allowed me to hear something I never heard before in that. And my wife laughs at me because I say, I finished listening to a CD of something,
right?
And I say, boy, they really did a good job on that, as if they hadn't done that good a job the last time I played it. So it's happening in my head, I guess, and I'm hearing things that I didn't hear.
Well, I think your brain gets, the more you critically listen to things, I think you do. Your brain grows in that respect, and you start making the connections that maybe those connections were a little too deep for you before.
That's one of the fascinating things about aging. If you can get, as you age, you have horizons that shrink. Like you don't start an athletic career when you're 50 or something, and horizons that stay the same, and some horizons that actually expand as you get older.
Such as?
Music is maybe the best example. There's another good example I'll give you in a minute. When I hear music now and know that I'm hearing it in a way that I could not really hear it or understand it when I was in my 80s or 70s or 60s, and being past 90, the view from 90 can be very different, and some horizons can actually expand. And if you have a relationship, which my wife and I have a relationship that is probably not unique, but it's very rare, we think, because we know a lot of people who've been married sometimes close to as long as we have, and their marriage is sometimes okay, but it isn't what ours is, and it's very rare to have something that actually gets better as it gets older.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that I think the more you know about music, sometimes it's almost a curse because it's a hard thing to verbalize because you almost can't listen to something on a real base level. You kind of are forced to you're paying more attention to parts and things. And
there again, people told me one time that don't get too deep into astronomy because it'll destroy the beauty of the night sky.
That's a great analogy. That is a terrific analogy.
Right.
That's it.
And that is true. And they said, well, then you start analyzing music, and you're not going to hear anything musical. Not true.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Now, I think you need to share a story about, I think it's a humorous story about a piano piece you wrote called An Old Familiar Air.
Oh, yeah. It maybe holds a record of the longest title there is. It's called An Old Familiar Air, which owns its own tuxedo and will travel. That was the idea. And it was based on, and I did that with a concert pianist named John Bell Young. I don't know, you might know him. Recorded that on the Americus label, a recital of piano pieces called Prisms. That's maybe
so the recording's called Prisms.
Yeah, that is called Prisms.
And that was one of the pieces on that recording.
Yeah, he did that, and one of the things that amazed me was that when I was a kid, about maybe 10 or 11, and I had a cousin that was 3 years older.
Okay.
And we would sing a song out of World War I that was a bawdy song about the lyrics of which were, the girls in France, they wear tissue paper pants. That was it.
Sure.
And singing that in front of my grandmother, who was a really arch Victorian mater.
Yeah.
You know, and she
wasn't too happy
was shocked,
with that. Yeah, wasn't too happy.
And so I thought, based on that tune, da 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 da.
Oh, it's that. Okay.
That's the tune of it.
Okay.
And so I did this piano piece, and that kicked around on the piano bench for a while. And John Bell Young, whom I got to know, I can't remember, some broadcasting or something. And I showed it to him, and he said, "Well, that I'd like to play that, you know." So
again, you had fully
and then it got published.
Yeah, but so you didn't just have the theme; you had actually notated the whole
Oh
thing.
yeah, I did.
For piano.
And then it was a little bit. I could sort of play it, but not well. You know.
That was my next question. You just took the words out. And again,
right.
Let's emphasize. Yeah. So you were notating these things that you couldn't even play.
Yeah, I couldn't.
That's great.
I could sort of play, but I didn't have the hand. You know, that varies greatly with pianists.
Sure.
Rachmaninoff could do a glissando in tenths. You know, and now do a glissando in octaves you got to have a big hand to do that.
Sure.
And in tenths,
big
and then he'd write something like that, and the pianist had to use two hands, and work it out some way. But I could play that at one time, and then I got it published.
I think it's fascinating that you have really experienced music making not necessarily as a player of any instrument. But as a composer.
Yeah,
that's where it's unique. I mean, I really am honest. I can't imagine I don't think I've ever heard of someone that's composed things and even gotten deep enough in it to have something like a symphonic piece completely finished that doesn't play an instrument per se. And I just think that's
unique.
But I think it's a great example again of there's a lot of ways to dip your toes in the water of music making, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular technique, or can you share with us anything? This is a fun thing to ask because everyone does it differently, of how it is you try to get the muse to, when you sit down to compose.
Isn't that funny?
When you write, it's the equivalent of music writer's block, right?
Yeah.
When you sit down to do it, anything you do to get yourself in the right mode?
I've been concerned about that a little bit because sometimes the muse comes and goes and everything. And Aaron Copland, toward the end of his life, I said, "What are you working on now?" He said, "Oh, I've said everything I have to say." And I thought, he was in his 70s, and I thought, my God, if I ever get to a point where I've said everything I have to say. But think of Rossini, 36 years old, lived a happy life and never wrote another note. He didn't want to, it was gone. And yet you got composers, like toward the end of his life, Beethoven right to the last, or older than that, Wagner and Verdi, who wrote in their 80s, and everything.
Just kept going.
And yet there are those for whom it just disappears. And lately, I haven't had any urgent need to write something down. And I'm wondering whether the muse is just vacationing or has left me. I'll have to. I shouldn't get so busy on other things. My problem is I've got I laughingly call it my second career because I lecture at Arizona State.
Sure.
And now I'm with a group of scientists there that I'm so flattered I can't stand it. But I've been interested also from the time I was very young in advanced theoretical physics, and I did
something light.
Well, it's like that. And I did a paper on whether external reality was real, going into the real. And I showed that to Lawrence Krauss when the university got one of the top physicists there is. because I had quoted him as being a Case Western Reserve, and the guy that I was having lunch with, the faculty, said, he's not a Case Western. I said, where is he? He said, he's here at ASU as of about 3 weeks ago. So he arranged a lunch, and I got to meet Lawrence Krauss. I'd read all his stuff. And I brought that paper, and I said, I quoted you, so you might as well read it. As a result of reading that paper, he put me in a small group of top physicists at ASU that are doing things like what was called the Origins Initiative is now the Origins Institute, and Beyond is a thing headed by Paul Davies and everything. These are people right at the cutting edge, and they put me in the middle of it, treat me like I'm faculty. I can't believe this, but that's my third career. So
it's getting in the way of your composing.
It's getting in the way of the muse, I think. I'm afraid, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you wonder whether someone says, whether it's gone or they just said, I'm tired. I'm out. They're in trouble saying it. But that is a great quote. And he said that to you at some point. Huh? He said, I've said all I have to say.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? It was kind of a disturbing thing to hear.
Well, what he did say certainly was nice.
Happens to people, yeah.
That's good. Well, you're an absolute inspiration, I think, for a lot of people that think of themselves as either as non-musical or as, for some reason, I'm at a point where I didn't study it as a kid, so that's left me. And I know for a fact that a lot of people want to get music in their lives in some way, and I think you're proof positive that you can do it in a lot of different routes. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. It's an absolute pleasure.
Great pleasure talking to you.
Great to meet you.
Thank you.
Music Makers is made possible in part by NAM, the National Association of Music Merchants. We envision a world in which the joy and many benefits of making music are a precious element of daily living for everyone. Want to play?
For more information on Music Makers with Scott Houston and program guests, please visit our website at www.musicmakerstvshow.com.